In the name of God, Creator, pain-bearer and Spirit of life. So much you can say about this story. I had to trim my sermon. I had to do some editing, I have to say, because I don't think you probably would have wanted to hear everything I wanted to say about this. There's so much. In this story, Jesus travels by boat across the Lake of Galilee to visit a town on the opposite bank from the region of Galilee. Galilee's on the western side, of course, and he went across the lake, and this is on the eastern side of the Lake of Galilee. And it's probably the town of Gerasene. It's modern-day Kursi, Kursi, and which is on the edge of Lake Galilee. Comment has been made that the place is not only opposite in geographical terms, but also spiritually, because these people were not Jewish. The question must therefore be asked, why does Luke tell this story? Because it's the only account in the Gospel where Jesus travels to Gentile territory. Why? In his 2-volume work, that is, Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, Luke gradually reveals Jesus' concern for Gentiles, non-Jews, and his willingness to engage with them. Now, of course, the thing that must be addressed in this story, it hits you straight away, is the subject of mental illness. Now, we all recognise that what was viewed as demon possession in those ancient times would now be considered to be a diagnosable and possibly treatable mental illness. Mental illness is a major factor in human life. It has been with us and recognised as an aberration for as long as human beings have formed communities. It's a condition that seems to be on the increase. Perhaps it's now more readily diagnosed and treatments offered. But if we take an overall view of world history, particularly since the 18th century, we observe trauma on a large scale brought about, as one example, by increasingly sophisticated means of destruction both of life and lands in war. It's not only the brutal and violent deaths of so many innocent people that's so traumatic, it's also the disruption of lives, the destruction of homes, and quite often negative attitudes towards those who are forced to flee for their lives into other countries, refugees. The United Nations Refugee Agency declared Ukraine as a level 3 emergency. And that's the highest level they have. More than 6.5 million people, and that's more than the population of Greater Sydney, have fled to other countries since the 24th of February this year. And the number is rising every day. More than 7 million people have been forced to flee from their homes in the Ukraine. 7 million people. Of course, this is a current issue. It's happening even as we sit here comfortably and safely in this church. We can only guess at the trauma these poor people are suffering. It's almost impossible for us to imagine ourselves in such a situation. And we can only see Ukraine as the latest in an ongoing series of traumatic events around the world. Look back over the past century, and we can only say that the 20th century has been a time of mayhem on an industrial scale around the world. Hardly a corner of this earth has not been touched by the violence of war and terrorism. An almost unimaginable figure posted by the United Nations has 89.3 million people worldwide forcibly displaced at the end of 2021, as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, or human rights violations. Now, to that we must add the almost 7 million people of Ukraine. Without any exaggeration, we now see 100 million people existing in trauma today. No wonder humanity has mental health problems. Now, all of those examples are divorced from our own experiences. This is all about somewhere else. But is Australia free from the problem? Well, no, it's not. The Australian National Health Survey of 2017-18 estimated that 1 in 5, or 4.8 million Australians, reported that they had a mental or behavioural condition during the period July 17 to June 18. 4.8 million. Overall, 15 to 24-year-olds had the highest proportion of mental or behavioural conditions, 26% of them, and 0 to 14-year-olds had the lowest. We obviously need to ask ourselves the question, what are we doing to our children, our young people, that beginning in their teenage years, our youth are experiencing issues that actually bring about mental illnesses? Our Australian society needs to stop and take a jolly good look at itself. I believe we need to impose restrictions on the internet for a start. While certainly believing in everyone's right to freedom to choose, sometimes I think it seems necessary for the common good and certainly the health of our youth for government to step in and remove some of these sources from our society, sources of evil. But let's go back to Luke's story. Let's compare the mentally ill man's community and Jesus' reactions and approaches. First, the community lives in fear of Jesus, whom they do not understand. They live in fear. And for them, if something can't be understood or is outside their experience, fear is the normal reaction. These people avoid the man whose illness they do not understand. And they reject Jesus, whose love and care for this unlovable creature they also do not understand. I love Jesus' approach to this fearful man. What would your approach be? His approach. What is your name? What is your name? He asks. Now, in that time and place, people considered a person's name to be more than a simple label of identification. They believed that the name expressed something of the person's essential character. So for the word legion testifies to his dreadful condition. The demoniac's community bound him with chains and shackles, but the demons helped him to break free. The freedom the demons gave is a false freedom, because it only worsened the man's dehumanization and isolation. He runs naked and unrestrained, an uncontrollable and frightening presence, and lives among the dead rather than the living. Jesus' approach to him is instantly caring, non-threatening, and even loving, a calming gesture. What is your name? There's another scourge within, coming back to the 21st century, there's another scourge within our community, besides violence, of course. That's drugs. Obviously, the two things are related, but we can also see the connection between this man who is really out of his mind and the effects of illicit drugs. Today we see a similar phenomenon among people whose addictions destroy them physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Like the demoniac, many live in marginal surroundings, on the streets, isolated from community. They're free from 9-to-5 jobs, dress codes, free from rent payments and other normal living expenses, so there is a freedom. They're free from cultural norms, but in the ways that really count, they're the least free amongst us. That verse we read, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, clothed and in his right mind. Now this after picture contrasts dramatically with the before picture. This man who earlier was driven by the demon into the desert now sits peacefully at Jesus' feet. He was naked, but now he's clothed. He was subject to wild, self-destructive behaviour, but now he's in his right mind. Upon seeing this transformation, the people are afraid. We are surprised at their response, aren't we? Why are the local people not filled with joy at the deliverance of this man from his demons? Why are they afraid? Well, they've witnessed a scene of inexplicable power in their midst. Like fire, it can be beneficial, but it could also destroy. What will Jesus do next? How will it affect them? That's what they're thinking. Luke presents this as a holistic healing, physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. Jesus has saved the man in all the ways that he needs saving. All the people asked him to depart from them, asked Jesus to depart from them, for they were very much afraid. Remember, we read. Now, while we can perhaps understand a bit of their fear, we're saddened by their response. Well, they have a choice. The Gerasenes could choose to celebrate the godly power in their midst, but they choose instead to cater to their fears. He entered into the boat and returned. Jesus obeys their wishes. That's another lesson for us. In those few words, Jesus will not impose himself upon unwilling people. The man wants to stay with Jesus. Well, wouldn't you? Wouldn't I? But Jesus sends him home to preach to the people who know him best, to become a missionary in residence. Jesus thus commissions this Gentile to preach to his own people before commissioning the 12 Jewish disciples. That comes later. So the Gentiles are met by Jesus first before the Jewish people. That's an interesting point that Luke is making. Jesus' instructions to this man are an exception to his usual practice of telling people to keep silent about their healing. This man's testimony will be a continuing ministry among Gentiles who are not yet ready to invite Jesus into their midst, but who cannot ignore this man's changed life. This ancient story has great meaning for us today. We are of sound mind. Well, we all like to think we are. We live freely in a land that's free from war and general violence. We're blessed materially almost without measure. It behoves us to listen to Jesus' words. Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you, As Christians, Paul tells us we are required, when he wrote to the Thessalonians, Paul says this, you are required to encourage those who are timid, take tender care of those who are weak, be patient with everyone. In practical terms, that is, support refugees. Give your time, money and love generously to anyone in need. That's what's coming out of this story. May the Lord be with you. Amen.